Hello, and thank you for joining me on another weekly update video. So I owe a update on what I was doing with the castings from the VermiBag Mini, and I have to say these castings are giving me trouble. I finally got them to a point where I could sift through the material, but I still have really large clumps and it's very dry. I try to moisten it and put it into a humid area to get it to loosen up, but it just does not seem like it's working. So I'm going to give it one more try, but I did want to sift what I can. But I want you to listen to this here. Despite adding a copious amount of water, I don't know if these castings are going to be saved, but I'm going to try it for one more week, and I'm going to give them a good dosing of water once again and put them in a more humid area in my indoor garden. The rest of the castings that I sifted out go into my casting bin, and if you can see the inside, you can see that I have a good bit of castings that I harvested from all of my bins. The depth of it goes about past my palm, so up from my fingers to the middle of my palm. So there is a good amount of castings that I was able to harvest from 4 of the bins, and I'll update on what happens with those castings that I am trying to save from the VermiBag Mini. I mentioned in previous videos that I had a new plan for the VermiBag tote that I am trying to grow the colony. I am going to experiment with my own breeding bin. I did take a mixture of regular finished castings and just coco coir. I didn't put any cardboard that was shredded in here, and I wet it down to give them a environment of their own that I'm not going to touch over the next couple of weeks. From the videos that I watched, which I watched a channel called Small Holding UK, they basically put aside a container just for the worms, and from what I read on the internet in various places, you want to do this for like 21 to 30 days to give the worms their own environment to breed in and give them areas where they don't bump into each other. I got this idea from 2 viewers, as I mentioned before, so it's not like I came up with this on my own. I do give them credit for giving me this, so I really hope this works out for me. What I did with the worms that were already in the bin was that I did sift this bin to try to find any mature worms that would have been in here. And as I was going through and sifting this bin, I realized that there were a lot of immature worms. So it would have taken a very long time for that VermiBag tote to even begin to increase the population, because there were a lot of juvenile worms in there. There were quite a few castings that I saw as I did this, but again, there were a lot of small worms and worms that did not have the defined clitellum. So I sifted on a larger mesh wire that I had to make sure that the worms did not go through it, but the material did go through. As I was doing this, I was definitely surprised by the lack of mature worms in the material and the actual size of the colony that was in the castings. I knew it was small, but I did think that when I had done the baiting process from the VermiBag Mini, that I had taken quite a few worms out of the castings. But when I went back and looked, it really wasn't as many as I thought it was. What was in my hand was mostly material. It wasn't a full worm ball of the juvenile, so it was very small. I'm going to treat this bin exactly the same way that the other bins are treated, with the exception of pushing the material together, kind of like what I do in the bait tray. Even though these are juveniles, they still will get older, and I want them to be able to bump into each other so that they can reproduce. So I'm going to push all the material together, which I should have thought to do beforehand, but I'm pushing all the material towards the center, giving it some moisture and then processing it like usual. Back over to the breeder bin, I put the mature worms that I found into the material, which again is just a mixture of cocoa core and finished castings. And one thing I remembered that was shared quite a bit was that you want to do about 100 worms per gallon of material. Since I had put a full gallon in and I only had like maybe 25 to 30 worms, I knew I had to take some out because it would lessen the chance that they would find each other in the material. Even though I do plan to top feed this to entice them to come up to the surface, I still took a good chunk of the material out to ensure that they do run into each other and are able to breed. And then I put a good chunk of worm chow at the top. I want them to get settled in before I feed them and do anything further with the bin. I gave it about 24 hours and then I thought to myself, you know what? I need to put more worms in there. So what I'm trying to get into focus is showing you the worms that I'm trying to pull out. This worm right here has a real defined clitellum segment. So I know this is a mature worm. So from all of my other bins, I harvested about 15 to 20 worms from them, so that at the end I had somewhere between 75 and 100 worms in the final breeding box. So I'm going to start with 100 worms in there, but I just didn't think that my chances of success were really good if I just left the 25 to 30 worms that I had. Additionally, I did want to try and keep it just being the worms from that particular colony so I could have a true sample of the colony itself and its growth, but that wasn't going to work. So I went back over to what I am going to be making my breeder box, and I added back the material that I took out the previous day. I didn't add all of it as I knew I didn't have fully 100 worms, but I added a good portion of it back so that they had enough space to move around. Again, I moistened it because it did dry up a bit and there were still some dry spots from the day before. And then I put some more worm chow on the top of it after adding in the worms. I'm going to come back to this in a day or so and put some food at the top of the bedding that they're in to bring them back towards the surface, but I did want them to go ahead and settle into their new environment. And after all that, it was just putting the paper back on and wetting that down and closing it up. I'm going to put it back to where it was in a more humid and warmer place than the rest of the worms are, so it won't be with the other bin, and we'll see what happens. I appreciate you sticking with me to the end. Happy holidays today, and thank you so much for watching.